Welcome, everyone. The Lake Forest Preservation Foundation board members welcome you to tonight's program. I'm Jan Gibson, Vice President. The Preservation Foundation's mission is to protect the historic visual character of Lake Forest, and our board is happy to say that we voted last week to ratify this mission statement after a long strategic planning process. Tonight we have an incredible program. John Bryan and Ed Uhlir will discuss the recently completed Millennium Park. Our friend Blair Kamin, Chicago Tribune's architecture critic and speaker at one of our events a year or so ago, stated in this August review of Chicago Millennium Park these words: "Of all the scenes that have played out since Millennium Park opened, this is the one that says the most. Children race around the black granite reflecting pool of the Crown Fountain, waiting for giant human faces to spit jets of water into the shallow pool." Kamin goes on to state, what visitors really are seeing is the future, a new kind of urban park, far more interactive than anything before it. It's the difference between architecture as object and architecture as event, and it's among the reasons that Millennium Park has instantly established itself as a triumph. And that is altogether appropriate because Chicago is the city where Americans have long come to glimpse the face of tomorrow. Millennium Park is a new kind of park, a park that is more about objects than ground beneath them, a park that is about participation rather than passivity, a park where the boundaries between sculpture, architecture, and landscape design blur, all to the great aesthetic effect. Those were Blair Kamin's words. We have tonight two gentlemen who know this park intimately. Many know John Bryan as the retired chairman of Sara Lee, among his other titles. We know him also as the past chairman and member of the National Trust Council of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and one of the preservationists who recently saved the Farnsworth House. He and his wife are proud stewards of the David Adler designed 1926 William McCormick Blair House and of Crabtree Farm. With him is the man who Blair Kamin told me just had to attend. Ed Uhlir is the project designer for Millennium Park, a position of monumental proportions. We are delighted to have both of them here tonight, and we welcome you to our program about Millennium Park. Mr. Bryan.
Thank you, Jan, very much. My assignment this evening is to tell you all about Chicago's Millennium Park. I'm going to do so by using a few pictures. And the first one you will see was taken this summer, just after completion of the park. Well, what is Millennium Park? First of all, it is 25 acres along Michigan Avenue in the very heart of Chicago. It's located between the Art Institute on Monroe Street and some very tall buildings on Randolph Street. Over the past 5.5 years, a mostly abandoned railroad yard has been converted into a veritable garden of the arts. It's a place that we have chosen to call Millennium Park. It is a concentrated urban parkland space where some of the world's great designers, architects, and artists have been commissioned to create their very best work. It's a park which we believe will become a defining symbol of our great city of Chicago. Below this 25 acres is a massive 4,500 car parking garage, railroad tracks, and a busway, all of that unseen. At the street level, you will find indoor and outdoor theaters for the performing arts, an innovative and interactive 21st century fountain, an enormous piece of sculpture that memorializes no one, it just celebrates Chicago, a contemporary destination flower garden, a skating rink, vast promenades, a curving footbridge, and so forth. Well, how did all of this happen? Millennium Park exists today because of a major, perhaps unique, public-private partnership initiated by Mayor Richard Daley. Chicago has a quite remarkable mayor. He loves building infrastructure, and he loves making this city more beautiful. He loves trees and flowers, and today, as you know, our city is literally filled with them. Flowers hanging on those lampposts and planting beds all along the streetscape. Well, about 6 years ago, this was the site of Millennium Park, that abandoned railroad yard, and Mayor Daley decided to do something about it. His vision was to build a major parking garage on the site and then to lay a park on top of it. He invited the private sector to join in this endeavor. Chicago has a remarkable business and philanthropic community, and they responded very well. The result was an expenditure to build this park of $475 million. $270 million was spent by the city of Chicago to build the garage and the basic park. These funds were mostly provided by revenue bonds issued based upon projected income from the garage. The private sector has expended approximately $205 million, monies raised from individuals, corporations, and foundations in our community. As an aside, I know that we continuously debate what activities should be undertaken by government as opposed to those undertaken by the private sector, and I suppose we'll always have that debate, but I'm quite positive that these two sectors of our society can accomplish much more and be much more successful by working closely together. Millennium Park is a tribute to that. Construction started on Millennium Park in October of 1998, a little over a year before the end of the millennium. This picture shows the park under construction. And here is the completed park on July 16th, 2004, as we got ready for the grand opening. To take you on a tour of Millennium Park, I'm going to use a map. I think all of you have maps handed out to you, but I'm going to refer occasionally to this particular map, which you see on the screen. We're going to start in the northeast corner of the park, and now to orient you, Michigan Avenue is along the bottom of this map. Columbus Drive is along the top. Monroe Street is to your right, across from the Art Institute, and Randolph is on your left, across from the Prudential and Aon buildings. In the northeast corner, there is the Music and Dance Theater. This is a picture of the completed Harris Theater, a 1,500-seat performing arts venue. The theater is totally underground. You're looking at the entrance lobby. The theater was completed almost exactly a year ago. In fact, the grand opening was on November 8th, 2003. It is what we call a mid-sized theater. It seats 1,500 people. It accommodates 12 music and dance and opera and symphony and such organizations. It has been very successful and is booked up almost continuously during its season. This is a picture of the interior stage of the Harris Theater, a great addition to Chicago's performing arts community. Well, back to the map, we see what is in many respects the centerpiece of Millennium Park, the Frank Gehry designed J. Pritzker Pavilion and Lawn. This is a model which many of us looked at for many years. It is a signature Frank Gehry building with all of the chaotic sculptural quality we see in a lot of 21st century architecture. And here is the completed J. Pritzker Pavilion in the summer of 2004. The critics and people all over the world love it. The Pritzker Pavilion is the home to the Grant Park Symphony, which for 70 years has played classical concerts in the summertime in Grant Park in Chicago. Free classical concerts. I believe that Chicago is the only city in the entire world that has free concerts open to the public all summer long. I should tell you that the Grant Park Symphony is under the auspices of Chicago's Cultural Affairs Department, which is headed by Lois Weisberg, and I can tell you also that the city plans to give the Cultural Affairs Department responsibility for managing the entire park, and they have appointed Helen Doria as the executive director of the park. We are looking forward to a substantially expanded summer program in the Millennium Park next year, and in fact, they're planning free concerts on the stage of the Pritzker Pavilion during the winter. We all very much wanted to have our new outdoor music pavilion designed by Frank Gehry. In 1998, Frank had recently completed his exciting and widely heralded beautiful new building, the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain. To get Frank, we needed some help, and we turned to Cindy Pritzker. Cindy and Frank are great friends. She had given him the Pritzker Prize for Architecture in 1991, and as you know, the Pritzker Pavilion is named in honor of her late husband, Jay. Frank did a masterful job for us in Chicago. Here's the picture that you often see from Michigan Avenue, looking up Washington in front of the Cultural Center, the old library. And here is a picture of the beautifully designed concert stage. I should mention that the pavilion has gotten great reviews for its marvelous acoustics and beautiful distribution of sound throughout the seating area, including those seated on the great lawn. The total capacity is about 12,000 people. You will recall seeing that trellis a moment ago with the large steel tubes painted silvery gray. They define the lawn and actually are used to distribute the music and sound. And in a few weeks, we plan to light up the pavilion and the trellis from Thanksgiving to New Year's for the holiday season. So that's when you want to come down and look. Returning to our map, you see a footbridge which crosses Columbus Drive and connects Millennium Park to Daily Bicentennial Park across from the drive. This is a picture of the model for the bridge, a sinuous, elegant, and handicapped accessible bridge. It's a beautiful piece of architecture. This 1,000-foot bridge, approximately 15 feet wide, gives stunning views of Millennium Park and the facade of Michigan Avenue to all who pass over it. The west leg of the bridge actually forms an acoustical barrier against the sound of cars on Columbus Drive. This is Frank Gehry's first ever bridge, and we think it is a masterpiece. It was sponsored by BP. We call it the BP Bridge. Now back to our map on the southeast corner of the park, you'll see what we call the Uhlir Garden. This garden is the result of a year-long competition which we held here in Chicago. As a result of the competition, we chose a collaboration between Catherine Gustafson, a prominent American landscape architect based in Seattle. She's the architect who designed the Diana Memorial, which recently opened in Hyde Park in London. And Piet Oudolf, a Dutch plants person who won first prize at the Chelsea Flower Show in London a few years ago. Piet's design trademark is these mass plantings of perennial flowers and grasses that look like giant oriental carpets in the landscape. And Bob Israel, an opera set designer from Los Angeles, Bob Israel is designing the special lighting for the Uhlir Garden. The Uhlir Garden is a 21st century contemporary destination flower garden. It covers 3 acres. It has this beautiful rill of water traversing the garden, and it's surrounded by a giant 15-foot hedge, which we call the shoulder hedge because we're the city of big shoulders. As it matures, I believe the Uhlir Garden in Millennium Park will set a new standard and a new stylistic approach for 21st century urban gardening. We are all very pleased with it. Looking at the map, across the street from Monroe is the Art Institute of Chicago, a quite large new wing, almost 250,000 square feet, has been designed, and construction will commence next spring, in May, in fact. The location of this new wing was obviously inspired by Millennium Park. It will become, in reality, an extension of Millennium Park. For several years, the Art Institute's architect Renzo Piano has been designing this rather elegant stone and glass wing, as we somewhat modestly are calling, and we are somewhat modestly calling this building the building of the century in Chicago. It will be the largest building which the Art Institute has ever built since its original building was built in 1893. The 2 principal purposes of the new addition are to conduct art education for children. You know, they don't do that much in the schools these days, and to display our extraordinary collection of 20th century art. Chicago's Art Institute has, over the past 100 years, put together one of the world's best collections of classic early modern art and art of the second half of the 20th century. In fact, only the Museum of Modern Art in New York and the Pompidou in Paris have larger or more important collections of modern art. So the Art Institute in Chicago has the world's 3rd best collection of 20th century art. With this new building at the Art Institute, Chicago will have 2 of the greatest architects of our time, Frank Gehry and Renzo Piano, facing off against one another right here in our city. Their buildings are lined up precisely to a meter on one another, with only the Uhlir Garden between them. And the Art Institute building is being closely harmonized with the garden. Catherine Gustafson is creating a special landscape at the new Art Institute building, the Renzo Piano Wing. She's designed a beautiful garden for the Art Institute, and this is a perspective drawing which depicts her designs for that garden. Continuing with our master plan, let's move to the southwest corner of the park and look at the Crown Fountain, an enormously successful part of the park. This is a drawing of the design for the Crown Fountain. It was created by Jaume Plensa, a Catalan artist from Barcelona. Jaume won a competition against two other notable artists and architects. One of them was Maya Lin, the architect and designer whose most notable work is the Vietnam Memorial, and the other Robert Venturi, a prominent architect from the United States. As you can see, the fountain is two glass 50-foot towers in a 200 by 40-foot basin of black granite filled with about 1/4 inch of water. Water cascades down the glass towers on all four sides. On the interior facade of the towers, there are video images programmed from time to time. Currently, the images are 1,000 faces of ordinary Chicagoans who for 5 minutes look down at you in slow motion 1/3 time and conclude their appearance by acting like a gargoyle, thereby causing great excitement for the children all over Chicago. This is classic interactive public sculpture at its best. Back to our map, I will move to the very center of the park, where the park's signature piece of sculpture sits in the SBC Plaza overlooking the skating rink in Michigan Avenue. Here it is, a 60-foot long stainless steel arch. This is the model. This shows a cutaway view of the arch where you can see the vortex, which rises underneath as you pass through the arch. Situated at the high point and in the middle of the park, this sculpture, which the artist calls Cloud Gate and which the public calls the Bean, reflects the facade of Michigan Avenue, it reflects the clouds in the sky, and perhaps most of all, it reflects the people who come to see it. Thus, it is also interactive and has been enormously well received by everyone. I must tell you that the Cloud Gate sculpture is not a finished piece. The panels, these stainless steel panels, 160 or more of them, have only been spot welded in place. There are 4 to 5 more months of work necessary to complete the sculpture. It'll be put under a tent on January 4th, 2005, and it will not be seen again until May. So if you have not seen it, please go down before the end of the year. From the Bean, or Cloud Gate, the Anish Kapoor sculpture, we'll move to the skating rink, the McCormick Tribune skating rink, which sits on Michigan Avenue just below the sculpture. A 16,000 square foot rink. It opened 2 winters ago. It's free and it's very popular. We're expecting record crowds this winter. In the summertime, it is converted into an outdoor restaurant. Adjacent to it is the Park Grill, a restaurant in the park. Now, just north of the skating rink is an area that we call Wrigley Square. It's named for our great chewing gum family from Chicago. A different type of structure was built here, a recreation. In 1953, in order to build a small parking lot, a 1917 memorial, a World War I memorial that was designed by architect Ed Bennett, who also designed Grant Park and other parts of Grant Park, and I learned tonight that his son founded the Lake Forest Preservation Foundation. But alas, the Bennett Memorial was demolished in 1953 at the corner of Michigan and Randolph. It seemed to us very appropriate that we should reconstruct that structure, which we call a peristyle, and use the structure to note the names of the individuals, corporations, and foundations who made possible Millennium Park. There are approximately 100 names which will appear on the peristyle. That's perhaps a good segue for me to tell you a little about the fundraising for Millennium Park, along with myself. The major fundraisers were Marshall Field here in Lake Forest, Dick Thomas, Ned Janata, Jim O'Connor, Vernon Stock, and John Mabey. As we gathered our team of these civic-minded folks to respond to the mayor's request that we join in this effort, we devised a fundraising strategy that had two parts to it. Major families or corporations who had manifest generosity in Chicago in our time would be invited to sponsor a principal enhancement, all of the principal enhancements in the park, by making multi-million-dollar contributions related to the cost of those enhancements. And then they would thereby be given the opportunity to give their name to these important enhancements, which would be in the park. There are 9 of them. I've been going through most of them. It is a remarkable fact that our group of founders, or our group of fundraisers, actually literally chose the names of the people or companies whose names we'd like to have in the park, and all 9 of them said yes. Then we invited other generous and interested individuals, corporations, and foundations to make one gift of one amount, $1 million, not more, not less. And thus, along with the sponsors of the major enhancements, they would all be recognized as founders of Millennium Park and have their names carved in stone for eternity in the base of the peristyle. To date, we have 96 founders. With one exception, they're all from Chicago, the area. These names will be forever recognized as those who, at the time of the beginning of the second millennium, generously gave this magnificent park this free payment to the cost of those enhancements. And then they would thereby be given the opportunity to give their name to these important enhancements, which would be in the park. There are 9 of them. I've been going through most of them. It is a remarkable fact that our group of founders, or our group of fundraisers, actually literally chose the names of the people or companies whose names we'd like to have in the park, and all 9 of them said yes. Then we invited other generous and interested individuals, corporations, and foundations to make one gift of one amount, $1 million, not more, not less. And thus, along with the sponsors of the major enhancements, they would all be recognized as founders of Millennium Park and have their names carved in stone for eternity in the base of the peristyle. To date, we have 96 founders. With one exception, they're all from Chicago, the area. These names will be forever recognized as those who, at the time of the beginning of the second millennium, generously gave this magnificent park, this free park, to the people of Chicago. I must apologize to you that we have room for only 4 more names on the peristyle, so if you're interested, I urge you to let me know as soon as you can. Now, why did the people of Chicago respond so generously? I think there are a number of reasons. They were certainly inspired by the location and the concept of Millennium Park. They certainly had great confidence in our respected mayor, and of course, there is the appeal of civic pride. All of us are competitive and attracted to being identified with the best. We like it when our city is defined as having the best of this or that. Civic pride is a powerful motivator. But I think the most important driving force in the fundraising was the notion of giving something, giving a free park to all the people of your own hometown. I've often called it the perfect gift. Most all of our donors are very fortunate people who, in the city of Chicago, became quite successful in our time. It's a rather powerful motivation to be part of a group that has the means and the generosity to give something back to the people and to the community where you've achieved that success. Well, on July 24th, 2004, all of our founders had a party to celebrate the opening of Millennium Park. A week earlier, on the 16th of July, the public was invited to see the park and to hear concerts. 1 week later, the founders threw a party which we've called the Party of the Century, and I brought a little video about that party. The video is going to begin with 2,500 guests arriving. They attended dedications, they dined in 2 enormous tents, watched and listened to a beautiful show at the Pritzker Pavilion, and later entertainment afterwards. The evening concluded with a grand spectacle of fireworks, during which the Chicago Symphony played Mussorgsky's Pictures at an exhibition, accompanied by fireworks from the top of all the buildings around Millennium Park. It was a memorable event. I thought you might like to see it. Millennium Park now belongs to the ages. It was and is the perfect gift, a free park for the people of Chicago. Now go forth and enjoy it. The reviews by the Arts and Architectural Press are 100% positive and glowing. I think the reviews have been great because of one thing. It's because the people who go to the park love the park. They feel good about being there. You can see it in their faces. Millennium Park is an uplifting place. A recent article I read the other night, a particularly erudite review, I think, is in the current issue of Art in America. The writer's Franz Schulz, a notable and prominent professor at Lake Forest College, and Franz says that Millennium Park is an artistic, architectural, and urbanistic accomplishment of the first magnitude. It is truly one of the most engaging urban landscapes in all America. But with all this outpouring of positive feeling about the park, many people have been assessing the significance of this new park in Chicago, and I have a few thoughts to offer about that. First, I think Millennium Park says an awful lot about the power of art and architecture. When it's good, everybody knows it. And just as we hoped, Millennium Park will surely build on Chicago's long-standing reputation as a city of great architecture. Beautifully situated as we are on the shores of Lake Michigan, Chicago has 26 miles of unbroken shoreline protected from development owned by the people. As you can see, the lake is a beautiful counterpoint to our skyscraper-filled skyline. In 1871, as we all know, a great fire literally burned Chicago to the ground, and most people credit the post-fire rebuilding of Chicago as the reason we have such an abundance of important early modern architecture by people like Louis Sullivan and Daniel Burnham. This beautiful facade, 10 blocks long, mostly 100-year-old buildings along Michigan Avenue, is landmarked and serves as the western wall of Millennium Park. Frank Lloyd Wright and Mies van der Rohe, arguably the 20th century's most influential architects, were right here in Chicago. This is a picture of Frank Lloyd Wright's seminal Roby House on the campus of the University of Chicago, and I was just down there the other day at the University of Chicago's Business School, and which is just across the street from the Roby House. The new business school there is an enormous building. You must go see it. It's beautifully designed and sensitively placed by Raphael Vignoli, one of the great Latin American star architects of our time. And this is Mies van der Rohe's famous Farnsworth House, a building which led to the creation of all those glass boxes that are such an important part of America's urban landscape today. I really do think this is the most important house built in America, if not in the world, in the 20th century, and it's just outside Chicago in Plano, Illinois. And here is a view of the Chicago River, where popular architectural tours are taken every day. Frank Gehry has said on many occasions that Chicago is the world's best city for modern architecture. Now with the Gehry Pritzker Pavilion and the Renzo Piano Wing at the Art Institute, Chicago's tradition as an architectural mecca will surely be strengthened. As for art, Chicago has had great collections for over 100 years. It's been a major center of modern art, but publicly displayed urban sculpture was a different thing until a major event happened in 1967, a turning point. And that was the unveiling of this piece of sculpture by the one artist who is likely the greatest of all the artists of the 20th century, Pablo Picasso. It was unveiled to the groans of most people. The sculpture became very controversial. Then it became an icon. Then it caused Chicago, and most importantly, it caused Chicago to develop an urban collection of modern outdoor public sculpture, a collection that really is unparalleled anywhere. Along with the statues of the heroes of yesteryear, Chicago now has monumental pieces of modern public art by all of the 20th century's great sculptors: Alexander Calder, Jean Dubuffet, Louise Nevelson, Klaus Oldenburg, Henry Moore, Joan Miro, Ellsworth Kelly, Richard Serra. They're all represented, and many more. So these two new pieces of public art in Chicago, Cloud Gate and the Crown Fountain, are just continuations of Chicago's great tradition for public art. And they may just be the public sculpture for tomorrow. Their scale and thus presence, along with this greatly engaging quality, a quality which we call interactive, is perhaps a major breakthrough in the world of public art. I'll quote from Blair Kamen's article. I thought Jan might quote, but she didn't. This is another quote he had. He said, "The people visiting Millennium Park no longer want to passively observe painterly scenes of nature as they did in Olmsted's day. That was an industrial age idea, when the charge was to provide relief from the crowded, polluted city. This is a post-industrial park, and people want to be actively engaged in what they see." Well, I cannot fail to mention the economic impact, which we all clearly see now that Millennium Park is finished. We estimated originally 2 to 3 million visitors a year would come to the park. We're now thinking more closer to 5 million. It's become a destination for people from all over the world. Perhaps even more important, the park is vitalizing the central section of the downtown Chicago, an area we call the Loop. It's also reviving South Michigan Avenue. In the Tribune, it was recently said that because of Millennium Park, the Michigan Avenue street wall is about to experience one of the most significant bursts of construction since it started to take shape at the end of the 19th century. The article also noted that Millennium Park has created a receptiveness to contemporary design at City Hall, and that's good too. There literally are 7 condominiums that are being developed with views of the park. The Heritage, one of the major ones where Mayor Daley is going to reside, is a striking building right next to the Cultural Center, and it's due to open next year. A combination of this park with all the cultural and business activity in the Central Loop makes it the place to live in Chicago in the future. As important, though, as it is for Millennium Park to define Chicago to the world and to add to our economic base, the most important significance of Millennium Park is what it does for the spirit of our people and the livability of the city of Chicago. Every day, everywhere I go, people talk about how they love Chicago, what a wonderful city it is. Nothing is more important than keeping a city lovable, making it livable, and people being happy about living together. Some have called Millennium Park a social mixing chamber where people of all income levels and ethnic origins really enjoy coming together. It's true, and where we live and shop and play, we unfortunately most of the time try to see if we can separate ourselves from one another, but not in Millennium Park. Millennium Park, I think, really celebrates diversity. One of my grandsons, who was just beginning his first grade of school, told me one day after the park opened that his teacher had been to Millennium Park, and that she told the entire class they had to go downtown to see the park. She said it was the most warm and the most welcoming and the most friendly place she had ever been. And that's why people like Millennium Park, and it's because of Millennium Park, I think, that Chicago can be and is becoming a more lovable and likable place today. Now, I told folks we would answer some questions. Ed, you and I can come out with an answer to most any question you can come up with. So you want to turn up the lights?
Parking garage open now?
Parking garage actually opened fairly early. It opened about a year or two early. Ed's more familiar with I am than the garage. I think it's doing quite well. Ed, you want to comment on that?
The garage opened while we were doing construction, so we opened half of it. Now the entire garage is open, and this is the Millennium Garage. There's actually 2 garages under Millennium Park. One is under Michigan Avenue, the North Underground Garage. That's 1,800 cars, and the Millennium Garage is 2,200 cars. It's paying off the bonds. We're very happy.
Filled up, is it?
Yes.
Other questions? Yeah, the bicycles. I didn't mention the bicycle, but its aspect of it, but it's unique, I think.
The bicycle station is the first one in Chicago, probably the first one in the country, because it's so complete. It has underground parking for 300 bicycles, and if you become a member of essentially a health club, there are 200 spaces reserved for those members. 100 spaces are available free to the public. But if you're a member for $100 a year, you get to park your bike in a heated, conditioned space. You can take a shower. You can leave a suit of clothes there to change into if you bike to work. And you can, only for $100 a year, it's really a bargain. It was sold out the first week it was open. And now we have 200 people on the waiting list to get into the club.
Now, many of you may not know, but bicycling is Mayor Daley's thing. He's out bicycling all the time. He's told me that he's going to bicycle across the United States, which I hope he doesn't, but he says he is. Yes, John?
Where is that bicycle club located on the map here?
It's located, there should be, actually it's not on that map, but it's located in the extreme northeast corner, right off of Randolph Street.
Mention the police.
Oh, the police bike patrol is also permanently stationed in the bicycles facility, so they are actually a presence in the park as well, police presence.
It's really quite exciting. If you like to bicycle, it's just a dream thing to do. Yes?
Is the park complete at this point, or are there other objects, monuments,
No.
pathways, or things that you're going to design in the future?
Well, the park is not complete because, as I mentioned, we've got to finish. We've got a couple of $1 million more work to do on the sculpture, just getting it finished. It will be mirror polished like a seamless drop of mercury when it's finished. We're installing, I think, next week, 2 90-foot benches along the side of the fountain. We've got a hedge that we're working on. We're working on some changes and some over at the Pritzker Pavilion. We want to put, Frank Gehry is designing 2 concession stands on either side of the pavilion there, and we're looking at some improvements there. We've got another hedge to do in the garden, so there's at least a year or so of work to complete there. We also have some space that we're going to use for these marvelous museum exhibitions, which the city has been having for years. If you've seen them, generally been photographic exhibitions, and they've been extremely successful, over 1 million people attending them, and we're taking a space back of the fountain and one back of the peristyle, and as soon as we have all the money to do it, we're going to fix those spaces up so that they will be basically galleries for temporary exhibitions in the park. So we've got a lot of infrastructure yet to do and a lot of programming ideas as well. Yes?
Will the pavilion ever be covered so you could use it year-round?
Well, that's a very good question. We did not think about doing that initially. And Cindy Pritzker and some of the rest of us have asked that Frank Gehry look at the ability at least to cover on a temporary basis the fixed seating. The fixed seating is 4,000 to 5,000 seats. The people on the lawn could put up umbrellas, but you couldn't put umbrellas up if you're sitting in fixed seating. And consequently, we are looking at trying to figure out a way that we could put some sort of a temporary structure over that for the bad weather time. Do you think we'll get that done, Ed?
Frank Gehry is working on it. There are some designs that we're reviewing right now. It is possible to do it. It's just a question of the cost, of course.
Yeah.
It would not be year-round, though. It would only be for, it's not a really year-round facility, although we have heated arcades on each side of the pavilion, so we can do events there in the winter, but you'll still be out in the cold.
There's a question back here, I think. I should comment a little bit on the role that the private sector is going to play going forward. We made a judgment that that we would continue in existence, that we would raise money to have an endowment, and we plan to have a minimum of $15, maybe $25 million of endowment, that is the private sector, in order to add to the programming and the maintenance of the park so that it can be run at a standard above the average of what it would be. And so, just as in the spirit of a public-private partnership in building, we're going to keep in existence what we call the Millennium Park Conservancy, which will have this endowment, which will raise money, and which will involve itself in some programming and some maintenance in order to keep the park at a very high standard. Ed is going to serve as the executive director of the Conservancy in doing that. So we're going to stay with it. A question back here, Jan? No.
Why is the peristyle about 7/8? I think I saw that it was 7/8 the size of the original.
Yeah, we reconstructed it 1/8 smaller, didn't we? Ed, tell them why.
It was just too expensive to make it full size. No, the real reason is we were forced to ground it on an existing structural system, which is they're the caissons that are holding up that garage. We built the garage up from the caissons, so we had to contend with the existing structure, and it was fashioned to fit.
Yes, sir.
Is there a function for the 4 Exelon pavilions, or are they just decorative, or what?
Oh, they're very much a function. I'll let Ed tell you about those. Exelon made a major contribution to those. Both of them have photovoltaics on top of them so that the sun runs them. But Ed, tell them exactly what the functions of the two pavilions are.
Well, there's actually four. Two at the south were designed by Renzo Piano to correspond to the new addition to the Art Institute, and they have photovoltaic cells on the roof, so they generate electricity. But they're essentially the garage entry pavilions, so there's elevators and stairs getting you from the garage up to the park level. Ultimately, there may be a connection between one of those pavilions and the new addition to the Art Institute. The two on the south, or two on the north, are much more elaborate. They're actually, the entire surface is clad with photovoltaics, so it's a unique design that is the first one in the United States. So the cells are actually sandwiched between glass panels, and they generate electricity on all four sides. So it offsets the cost of operating the building. The one in the northwest corner will be the welcoming center for the park. So you will go there to get tours, or to get borrow a wheelchair, or to pick up a tour guide, or we're actually going to have audio tours of the park. So if you want to find anything that's going on in the park, that's the place to go. There's also public washrooms there, and there's offices to run the park. The one on the northeast will have a gift shop for the park. So you can buy all things millennial there. And there's such a demand for products related to Millennium Park that we think we should be selling them. So.
Yes, sir.
Please talk a little bit about fundraising, and specifically in the annual operating, how the operating is funded beyond the
Well, in my remarks earlier, as I said, the private sector has thus far raised about $205 million. About $60 million of that was raised specifically for the Harris Theater. 145, $50 million of it is what was raised to build these various enhancements within the park. And we expect to have somewhere between $15 and $25 million of endowment left over from that. As I said earlier, the fundraising was all multi-million-dollar gifts or million-dollar gifts. Going forward, we will be using the endowment that we have, but we also will be doing fundraising at a lower level with things such as Friends of Millennium Park, or for specific projects. One example is that we've raised a reasonably small amount of money, but an adequate amount of money to be able to put Christmas lights on the Frank Gehry, on the peristyle, on the trellis from Thanksgiving to Christmas. So that's something that the city would not have done. Our role will be to raise money for specific things like that going forward. The city will maintain the park as it maintains all the other parks. They are much better than the private sector, frankly, would be at taking care of the restrooms, the security, the lights and the water and the basics. What we want to do is to add the extras. We do have a contract with the city where we will horticulturally manage the garden. Frankly, in getting a person to sponsor the garden, we wanted to make sure that we could assure that person that the garden would be well maintained in perpetuity. You don't know, we may have a mayor who hates flowers one of these days and would say, why would you spend $100,000 a year on gardeners over there? Well, we have an endowment for that going forward, as we do to curate the fountain and to polish the sculpture. So we'll be raising money for extras as well as those things, but the city will be doing the basic management of maintenance of the park.
The Guggenheim Bilbao has been just a major economic catalyst for that whole part of Spain. Have you guys made any projections in terms of the dollars coming into Chicago?
There were some made, Ed. Do you remember what they were? I know that we think that there at least 3 million visitors will be coming. Bilbao had 600,000 people, I think, came the first year to this city no one had ever gone to. We're seeing that right now from all over the world, as well as obviously people coming from all over the Midwest.
Initially, when we estimated the 3 million maximum visitors per year, that was going to generate about somewhere between 200 and 300 million additional dollars from tourism and visits to Chicago per year. We're also, the Heritage Millennium, there are 7 condo developments that are attributing Millennium Park to their success now. And just the Heritage Millennium, they're predicting that the real estate taxes generated per year are about $5 million from that one development. That site used to generate maybe $500,000 a year. So when you compound that with all the other developments, it's pretty significant. And also the businesses on Michigan Avenue have a resurgence of economic viability because of Millennium Park. All the people coming to Millennium Park are also spending money in the stores and shops that are surrounding the park. So it's had a major impact, and it would be interesting to just figure out what that was monetarily at some point.
Yeah, if I were going to move downtown, I'd much rather be there because the park becomes something you can go to every evening. People just go down every evening and wander around and look at people and sit after dinner or something like that. And you've got every one of Chicago's major cultural venues is there. The theater district, the museum, the symphony, the opera, the library, everything is right in that area. In North Michigan Avenue, all you can do is shop. And so I think that's where you ought to move to. Yes.
Is the Crown Fountain, are those faces going to be working in the winter, or is that?
The faces will continue working in the winter. There are 1,000 of them, but the water is off as of, I think, the 1st of November. And we'll come back on when, Ed?
It'll correspond to the opening of Buckingham Fountain, so it's about mid-May.
The faces, I don't know whether they'll last 2 years or 20 years. It's basically what the artist curated it for. Whether he changes that or not, I don't know. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Bridge.
Yes.
Primarily takes you down Columbus Avenue, and where does it?
Well, we've been accused of building a bridge to nowhere, and people love it because they just walk over and walk back. But in fact, there is a garage over there with, I think it had 2,600 cars. So you've got the 4,500 under the park and 2,600 just across the bridge. Now, Daily Bicentennial Park, as it's called, has tennis courts and a wildflower garden. It was named in 1976, I think, after the mayor's father. It is a very underused park. And at one time, he was thinking that it would be nice to develop it into a destination. One destination that was mentioned was a children's park or something like that. So I rather think it won't sit there long before there'll be something to get you going across the street. But I'll say this, that bridge has now inspired the mayor, and he's got architects all over designing all these bridges across Lakeshore Drive and all down there. No little functional bridge anymore. Oh. Jan, I think that's about it. Very good. Thank you all.
Thank both John Bryan and Ed Uhlir for coming tonight. We also know what it's like to have a bridge to nowhere. Walden Bridge, sometimes Walden Blessed Edge was called that, but we know better. So I hope if you haven't been to Millennium Park, please go and you see how beautiful it is. And our next program, by the way, is November 21st, Sunday, at the Finley Barrel House. Susan Benjamin is going to have a book signing and reception. Please plan on seeing us there, and thank you very much.